Have everybody please close together and your family playing at a beautiful park with your pets. Suddenly, under brief circumstances, you must relocate to Miami where pit bulls are banned. And you have to put your pet up for adoption. I have everybody, now you guys can open your eyes, please. Alright, according to Why Not to Breed Pit Bulls from a Pit Bull Advocate website, pit bulls are currently the #1 bred dog in the United States. They are also one of the hardest breeds to find homes. It is estimated that there is a current average of 3 million pit bulls living in the USA, and only 1 in 600 will find a forever home. Sadly, for every 1 pit bull placed in a loving home, there are 599 killed, and that statistic does not exclude puppies. Now imagine if you were part of that 599. Alright, so today I will be speaking about why pit bulls should be allowed as pets and not discriminated against. First, I will give you a brief history on the pit bull breed, and are they really genetically inclined to fight? Second, I will talk about the negative impact the media has had, and last, common mistakes. Now that we've covered what I will be speaking about, let's begin with the brief history. According to Matter and Jane's book, America Pit Bull Terriers, they originated in the UK by crossbreeding Old English Bulldogs with Terriers. And during World War I, they were mascots for bravery and neutrality. And this is Sergeant Stubby. He was in World War I, he saved hundreds of lives. And this is Michael Vick's, one of his old previous dogs that, what happened there. And this right here is just like a poster that they used to have during the World War I era. The pit bulls were also favorite dog among politicians, scholars, and celebrities like Helen Keller, Theodore Roosevelt, and the Little Rascals. They all own pit bulls. Now I'm going to talk about the negative media portrayal. The All-American dog began to be more exploited through dog fighting in greater number in the 80s. They were often associated with poverty, urban thugs, and crime. And then the media, including Sports Illustrated, shamefully capitalized on fears of a modern-day werewolf by promoting stereotypical images like the one shown on the right. And the reputation of the entire breed was dragged down with sensationalistic headlines and damaging myths and untruths. And this right here is just a graph that shows you the smaller dogs, such as the Pembroke Welsh Corgi, a Chihuahua, and a Dachshund. And then what this chart is showing you how, like, when you go adopt a pit bull, there's a certain percentage that they have to pass of like behavior characteristics. They have to be above 80% in order for you to adopt them. And then with the statistics, it's estimated that the American Staffordshire Terrier has a more higher behavior rate as opposed to the smaller dogs. That also includes the Bull Terrier and the Pit Bull Terrier.
Oh, is it?
No, the bar graph doesn't come in. I don't know why. Okay. Now I'm going to be speaking about the common mistakes and myths. All right, the first one is pit bulls having locked jaws. The jaws of the pit bull are functionally the same as the jaws of any other breed, and this has expert examination. And pit bulls attack more people than any other breed, which is also false. The statistics are difficult to obtain accurately because there's a lot of different breeds of pits, but they're just labeled under like pit bull type dogs. And then the last one, pit bull turn on their owners, which is also false. dogs as species do not turn on their owners' behaviors just because. There's always reason for behaviors, and when aggression becomes a problem, the reason can be such things as improper handling, lack of socialization or training, or a dog misreading the behavior of an owner, rarely due to like diseases or just a mistake. Now that I'm done with my speech, I'm going to ask if anybody here will do their own research before making assumptions and discriminating against the dog. Okay. And then will anybody else, come with me to march in a peaceful demonstration in Washington? All right, thank you.
Everybody please close their eyes. I'd like you to picture a family. 3 generations all living under one household together. Grandma's sitting on the back porch, watching her grandchildren play in the distance, unable to play with them because she's sick. She is frail from cancer. A pink bandana wrapped tightly around her head, hiding her hair, or what's left of it from her last painful round of chemo. She is in constant pain. She is wishing there was someone or something that could help her. Then, the family hears about a new medicine, proven to help patients like Grandma. The family wants Grandma to take advantage of this new powerful medicine, but it would mean that they would have to uproot and move far away. Now open your eyes. Currently, 18 out of 50 states have legalized the medicinal use of marijuana. This information came from John Gerardo in his book, Cannabis, The Explosive Rise of Medical Marijuana Industry. Today, I will persuade you about why marijuana should be legalized. And by the end of my speech, you will hopefully also agree with me why legalizing marijuana will not only help our government, but could help people with serious illnesses. First, I'm going to talk about how legalizing marijuana could help get the United States out of debt. The tax revenue could seriously help our economy. Next, I'm going to break a few marijuana stereotypes. We'll find out if marijuana is really as bad as it sounds. And last, we're going to talk about if using marijuana is a criminal act or medicinal use. Now that I told you what I'll talk about, let's get started with how to get the United States out of debt. And this information came from a 2009 survey on drug use and substance use. You can see here with the graph, they surveyed people and found out the percent of people reporting previous use. Only 6.6% of people reported using marijuana. Well, of course, it is still illegal. 23% said that they have used cigarettes in the past month, and almost 52% have said that they have used alcohol. Now, in 2009, the same time they did this survey, over $5.5 billion were brought in tax revenue for alcohol alone. So if marijuana was legalized and taxed, they could also bring in the same amount of money. Now that I told you how it could help our government, let's break a few marijuana stereotypes. This information came from Jeffrey Schahler's book, Drugs Should Be Legalized, Criminalized, and Deregulated. We've all heard that marijuana is a gateway drug. Well, in reality, 75% of marijuana users never use harder drugs. We've all heard that marijuana is addicting. Well, health experts say that medical marijuana is less habit-forming than caffeine. You all drink caffeine. Marijuana is a drug for lazy teens. We've all heard that before. Well, 65% of admitted marijuana users are between the ages of 35 and 55 years old. Now that we've heard and broke a few stereotypes, let's find out if it is really a criminal act. Now, before we go forward with any of these pictures, there will be one that is going to be a little bit graphic, so if you don't want to watch, please don't. This came from an article in High Times America written by Tony. Now, currently, in 2010, over 850,000 people were arrested for minor marijuana offenses. That includes minor possession or possession of paraphernalia. 850,000 people in the year 2010. Now in this picture, you'll be able to see police officers pretty happy about a recent marijuana bust. Well, it was said that over the war on marijuana has cost us over $22 billion. Who do you think pays for that $22 billion that it costs for these police officers to do a bust on a plant? And now this will be the graphic photo. I do apologize. We saw the officers previously excited about their marijuana bust. They do it all the time. There's war on marijuana. But in the past 8 years, over 125,000 murders have gone unsolved. Now we don't know why. Could be lack of evidence, could be no witnesses. But if the police officers weren't so focused on busting minor marijuana users, most of the time for medical purposes, they could be out there finding the murderers who committed these 125,000 murders that are still unsolved. Now that I have told you why I believe that medical marijuana should be legalized, who wants to move to California with me where marijuana is already currently legal? Nobody else? JJ, yay, Maida, okay. Well, if not, will you please at least continue to research marijuana? Last year, Colorado was one of the states that legalized marijuana for recreational use. Up in the next couple of times when voting comes, there will be, and especially here in Florida, there should be voting for legalizing marijuana, whether it's medicinal use or recreational use. So will you at least please do your own research, and when the voting time comes, be educated on the topic. Thank you.
Quiet, please. Thank you. All right, whenever you're ready.
Can everybody close their eyes, please? And my day is midnight. You went up and you attend the club, and where the club is located in Brooklyn, where it's crime, murder, and everything else. But suddenly you see a wall that has a picture that you cannot believe what it is. So that picture has a graffiti. Graffiti can be a form of art that the people express themselves. According to 7%, the people that do graffiti are teenagers. This information is from graffiti.com. Now I'm going to talk about Today I'm going to talk about graffiti and why it should be legalized. My 3 main points are the reality of graffiti, how to increase and decrease at the same time, and the reputation that graffiti has over the years, and there are other graffiti but it's too late. So now you know about my 3 main points, I'm going to talk about graffiti. According to the city of Minneapolis, the number of reports the number of the last 12 months of 2010 have been increasing and increasing at the same time. That is good. Because more people doing graffiti. The bad thing is, another good thing is that the gun graffiti is decreasing by every single month. So not all graffiti is that bad. And target graffiti means the people that are beginning to graffiti when they have 13, 12. So it cannot be decreasing because people police are trying to vandalize graffiti. So now that you know about my first main point, let's talk about my second point. This information comes from Graffiti Live by John Sanders. Many people say that graffiti only sits in the street. They are wrong. Graffiti can be electronic, t-shirt, commercial, political. Women and non-graffiti, that is not true because 50% of the population are free are women that do it. There is no reason for a freedom that is wrong because, like I said earlier, people can protest with rebellion against the culture, against the politics, and the freedom is back now that is true because there's a museum dedicated to the freedom in Brooklyn, New York. Now that you know about my second point, let's talk about the term for the art of the freedom. The freedom can be shown any place. For example, this t-shirt, it kind of looks cool, it's about Green Lantern. And this is political when I talk about Young McCain versus Barack Obama, and this one is still when there is somebody painting. Now that you know about the best feeling, how many of you would go on a seminar and say that the field is an excellent art? Now, how many of you would post a picture in Facebook, to Twitter, MySpace? Thank you.
Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Bailey Silva, and I'd like to start by asking you all to please close your eyes. Imagine that you are an injured animal. You have been abused and neglected until you're eventually abandoned along an empty road. You can barely walk. As you limp along, a strange van pulls up next to you. People get out and force you into the back. You arrive scared at a strange place full of metal cages. The people treat your wounds and give you food. You finally begin to feel a little bit better. Every day, families come in and look at you, but they always leave with a different pet. After months of this disappointment, you are led into a cold room. The person that feeds you every day is petting you as you feel a needle stick into your side. Everything goes black. You never had a home or a family. Please open your eyes. According to Catherine Topaldi, Animal Abuse, Helping Animals and People, in the U.S. alone, between 3 and 4 million dogs and cats are euthanized each year in shelters. Today I'll speak about animal adoption, and by the end, hopefully you'll feel compelled to consider adopting an animal. First, I'll speak on the euthanasia of animals. Is it a big deal? Exactly what percent are euthanized? Then I'll speak about the effect on animals, good or bad. Does an animal without a home really suffer? And last, I'll speak about animal adoption, important or not. Could it save animal lives? Now that you know what I'll be speaking about, let's talk about the euthanasia of animals. Is it a big deal? According to House for Help, by Pets in the Recession, by The Economist, these are the actions taken by animal shelters in 2012. 10% of animals that were lost were found and returned to their owners. That means that only 10% of all the animal shelters were returned to their original home. 18% of animals in shelters were just transferred to another shelter. They weren't adopted, they didn't help them in the process at all, they were just moved from one shelter to another, and it just prolongs the adoption. Only 28% of all animals in shelters were actually adopted. That's a really small number, so all of the other animals did not have a new home. And 44% of all animals in shelters were actually euthanized. That means that almost half of all the animals in a shelter were put to sleep for no fault of their own, not because of their temperament or because they have issues, environmental issues, just because they were not chosen for adoption. Now that you know about the euthanasia of animals, let's talk about the effect on animals, good or bad. According to Maggie Spruill, Animals in Need, from the Animal Legal Defense Fund, these are some myths about animal adoption. Since it came from a bad home, it cannot be a good pet. That's not true. Research shows that almost all animals are able to be rehabilitated regardless of their last home. Even if they were neglected or abused or had temperamental issues when they first arrived at a shelter, almost all shelters have very good rehabilitation programs with very good animal rehabilitators who have been trained to get these animals ready for adoption and be able to function in a household with kids and with other pets without being negative. Adopting animals would not change anything. Actually, if adoption rates doubled, then the euthanasia rate would go down by 64%. That means that more than half of the animals that are set to be euthanized would no longer be euthanized. They would have a chance at life that they would not have if they were kept in a shelter. And animals do not understand the difference between a shelter and a permanent home. Actually, studies show that animals in a shelter generally get less attention and care than animals with a permanent home. The animals in shelters, there's very low funding and there's often very low staffs, so they do not have the opportunity to play and enjoy life as an animal that they would if they were loved as pets in a permanent home. Now that you know about the effect on animals, let's talk about animal adoption. Important or not? According to the ASPCA, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, only 1 out of every 10 dogs born will ever have a permanent home. That means that 90% of all dogs will never have one home when they're loved and be like a permanent pet. Most dogs will be moved from house to house or from shelter to shelter. A lot are abused and neglected. They be stray. They have to find their own food. And they'll be put in danger of having to they could get hit by cars. And a lot are euthanized because of this. There's about 6 to 8 million animals in shelters at any given time. That's a lot of animals. Anytime you walk into a shelter, there's tons of animals. Most of the cages are packed full. They're running out of room to keep them. They have very low funding, and that's because the adoption rates for animals are so low currently. All these animals get minimal care. They only get what they need to survive instead of what they need to make their life enjoyable. And homeless animals actually outnumber homeless people 5 to 1. So that means for every 1 homeless people, there's 5 homeless animals that will never have a home or never be loved as a pet. And 1 animal is euthanized in a shelter every 8 seconds. That's millions of animals being euthanized each year. That means that in the time that I've been speaking, almost 50 animals have been euthanized. Almost all of these animals are euthanized not for temperamental issues or for problems getting along with other animals or for aggression or health problems. It's simply just because they were not chosen for adoption, so therefore they were put down because the shelter cannot afford to keep them. Now that you know about animal adoption, how many of you would go with me to protest against euthanasia in animal shelters? How many of you would agree to at least consider adoption if you ever decide to get another pet? Thank you.
All right, whenever you're ready, go for it.
You already started.
Okay, my name is Dina. Can you guys all close your eyes, please? Okay, and imagine being in a car with the people closest to you. And you guys are driving down the highway, going a little over speed limit, listening to music, laughing, having a good time. And the next thing you know, you hear gasps and screams from the people you're in the car with, and then everything is a blur and everything goes black. All right, you guys can open your eyes. That's a cause of texting and driving. From texting and driving statistics, while texting and driving, the minimum amount of time that's taken off the road is 5 seconds, which leads to text messaging making a car accident 23 times more likely to happen. Today I will be speaking about texting and driving, and by the end you will know the dangers of it. Texting and driving, life or death, how texting affects your lives and of those around you. Being distracted, if it's worth it, how much attention texting and driving really takes off of the road. And texting and driving, if it's safe or not. And I'm going to explain to you guys how unsafe it really is. Now that you know what I'll be talking about, Now that you know what I'll be talking about, I'm going to explain to you guys a graph which I got from CBC and WHO latest studies on distracted driving. From ages 18 to 29 years old, there's 29% of people in that age group who text and drive. 30 to 39 years old, 12%, 40 to 49, 8%, and then 50 to 59, there's only 2%. So younger drivers text and drive more frequently than the other people, which is where most of the crashes come from, is people who are younger drivers. Now that you know how many people text and drive and who causes it, I'm going to talk about how much time is really taken away from the road. People think that texting and driving doesn't affect car crashes, but in reality, it makes a car crash 23 times more likely to happen. Reaching for your cellular device doesn't make crashes more likely to happen, but even just reaching for your device, not even texting and driving, makes the crash 1.4 times more likely. And people believe that very few are killed by car crashes. But in 2011, 3,331 people were killed in car crashes. Were killed in crashes involving being distracted. Now that you see what happens when texting and driving and you're being distracted, I'm going to talk about how unsafe texting and driving really is, which I got from texting and driving statistics. This picture is to show there's a car behind with the sign that says stop texting, to show when you get distracted, that's basically what happened. That can happen. Obviously, the people didn't survive that car crash. That car is pretty much totaled. So if you stop texting and driving, you'll stop that from occurring. This picture says, honk if you love Jesus, text while driving if you want to meet him. Basically, to try and get people to... Basically, if you don't want to die, just don't text and drive. In this picture, the lady's looking at her phone, texting and driving, which she's oblivious to the people right in front of her, the lady and her daughter. The time she took to look at her phone is gonna be the time that she's probably gonna hit these people and kill them. So now that I have proved to you why texting and driving is not safe and should not be done, how many of you will leave today and never text and drive again and make sure everyone around you doesn't? Alright. How many of you will try to limit the amount of times you text and drive and try and stop the ones around you? Alright, thank you.
Ben Stinkage. Imagine with me, if you will, that you wake up one day, it's a normal day, you wake up to find that your Twitter account has been deactivated because of the political views that you voice on there. Google has been censored to exclude half of its results because of Congressmen. And Wikipedia has been shut down just because of something that one user has posted. These are all possible scenarios that could occur if internet censorship laws that Congress has proposed went into effect. If you're unhappy with these scenarios, you would be in agreement with the 7 million Google users that signed a petition against internet censorship laws. Thousands of major websites around the world joined together on January 18th to black out their sites, like you can see here, to educate users about the potential effect and trouble that these laws could create. This is according to a Washington Post article. Today I will talk to you about the problem with internet censorship laws, By the end, you will hopefully understand the importance of internet freedom and learn how to keep it free. The 3 main points I'll be discussing today are, first of all, the proposed bills, what they mean for us and the negative effect they can have on us. Secondly, current censorship, what countries are censoring the internet around the world and how we risk losing our freedom of speech. And lastly, internet freedom by the numbers, the increase of censorship worldwide. Now that you know what I'll be talking about, I'll discuss the proposed bills and some common misconceptions that people have about them. This comes from a book by Ronald Becker called Access Denied. The first common misconception is that internet censorship will only affect illegal music and movie downloads. In actuality, censorship will affect anyone who posts, reads, watches content on the internet. So anyone who goes on the internet will be affected. The second misconception is that protect cyberspace as a National Asset Act. The purpose of it was to increase cybersecurity and prevent attacks on U.S. infrastructure. That sounds good, right? But what they didn't tell you is that it effectively gives this kill switch power to the internet of the president. While their intention is good, it puts too much power on one man. The last misconception is that the purpose of the Stop Online Piracy Act was to block websites that host illegal copyright infringing content. What they don't tell you is that sites like YouTube, Google, and Wikipedia can be taken down just because of what someone posted. For example, a music video could be leaked before it was released by the music label. That record label could shut down YouTube by sending a letter to internet providers claiming copyright infringement. Not just that video, but the whole entire site. Now that you know a little bit about the bills that have been proposed, I'd like to talk about what currently is being censored around the world. This information comes from an article by Nilay Patel explaining what SOPA is. China has the largest and most complex filtering system in the world currently in place. It blocks sites like Google, Facebook, Twitter, WordPress blogs, Amazon, you get the point. Anything that gives users too much of a voice, they shut down. Secondly, if you remember from my last speech, I spoke about the Arab Spring revolutions in the Middle East and the effect that the internet has on them. In three countries, the governments have stopped the flow of news in and out of the country by shutting down all access to the internet. And here in the U.S., the government only censors sites for defamation and copyright infringement currently. However, there have been accusations that Verizon, AT&T, and Comcast have all filtered out what they consider to be controversial content. Now that I've talked to you about some of the examples of censorship, I'll talk about the worldwide scale of the censorship. This comes from the Freedom House website. As you can see from the graph, 7 countries in 2009 were reported to be partly free, while 4 were not free. This categorization is that partly free means only that they've been filtered on a very small scale. But countries that are not free in this categorization, some examples would be the Middle Eastern countries and China, where they have heavily filtered access, or they have no access at all, such as in North Korea. In 2009, these numbers jumped up, and in 2012, these numbers jumped up to 20 and 13 countries that are either partly free or not free at all. As you can see, as the internet continues to grow and becomes more integrated into our lives, worldwide censorship also continues to increase. Now that you know a little bit more about internet censorship, you really have 2 options. You can A, pretend that everything is fine and hope that your favorite sites don't get taken down, or you can sign a petition and research these laws a bit more, help spread the message, tell your friends, what the potential negative effects we're showing down there could be. How many of you would be willing to do that?
Already.
For those of you who would, you'd be joining millions of others around the world that want to protect our freedom of speech and the open exchange of ideas. The internet is supposed to be protected.
Can I have everybody close their eyes? Close their eyes, please. Imagine a married couple. They both have been married for 7 years. They decide to have kids, but unfortunately comes a problem when Tanya is unable to conceive. Her husband Anthony tells her that it's okay. There are always other options. She stares deeply into his eyes and says, "All I ever wanted was a child like my beautiful niece." You can all open your eyes. "95% to 97% of animal cloning attempts still end in failure. And the scientists who cloned Dolly the sheep failed 276 times before they succeeded in producing a single live-born clone of an adult sheep. Attempting to clone humans will end in an even higher failure rate." This information was found from the ethics book by Barbara McKenna, 2012. Today, I will influence you all to understand why human reproductive cloning is unethical and should not be passed by Congress. And by the end of my discussion, you will have a better understanding as to why I'm against it. My topic is on human cloning. My first main point will be the weakening of human respect. It is replacing the natural sexual procreation by manufacture. Second, I will talk about health problems. If animal cloning creates health problems in humans, human cloning can cause serious abnormal development or mortality. My third main point will be children are human beings, not objects. Humans should not be used as objects for our own happiness. Now that you all know what I will be talking about, let's move on to my first main point. Weakening of human respect. This information was found from the ethical implications of human cloning. Babies created by cloning could be grown in artificial wombs. Not true. Medicine has been trying for 50 years to create an artificial womb, but has never came close to succeeding. If such a thing as a womb existed, we could save premature babies that have not yet developed lung function. Reproductive cloning is a natural sexual procreation. That's not true. No male is necessary in the process of cloning, and it is an asexual reproduction. Reproductive cloning is inexpensive and efficient. Not true. Reproductive cloning is expensive and highly non-proficient. This includes 90% failure rate of cloning attempts to produce a viable offspring. To produce only one clone, more than 100 nuclear transfer procedures could be required. Keeping in mind how human cloning has an effect on human respect, now we'll talk about the health problems. This information was found from an article on End Animal Cloning. This chart shows the frequency of health problems and premature deaths in cow clones versus conventional animals, which is just another word for common or normal animals. For late-term pregnancy loss, there was 40% of cow clones, and for the regular animals, there's 15%, which shows that the cow clones have a greater risk. And for late offspring syndrome, 50% of cow clones were affected, and only 10% of the regular animals. And for neonatal mortality, which is during the first 28 weeks of pregnancy, 30% of cow clones were affected, and only 10% of the regular animals. So overall, when trying to produce the clones, they have the greater risk of any of these three things happening to them. Now that I have spoken to you all about the health problems, let's move on and talk about the children are human beings and not objects. This information was found from Human Reproductive Cloning by Joyce Havstead, 2010. The procedure used in cloning humans is very similar to cloning animals. The acquired embryo is placed in a petri dish, such as this one, and is allowed to develop into a mass of 2 to 8 cells. According to a medical ethics professor, Leon R. Cass, during this process, the child-to-be can be pinched, inspected, weeded, pruned, and even wrapped and delivered. So it seems that it's special ordered rather than how it's normally supposed to be and conceived. Human cloning creates high risk of bodily harm to the child produced through cloning. Some risks include abnormalities, deformities, and premature arthritis. If it took 276 times before they were able to duplicate Dolly, how many times will it take to clone an actual human, if possible? Aren't animals meant to experiment on and not humans? Assisted reproduction turns children into artifacts of scientists instead of organic products of human beings. Scientists seem to just want to prove that they could clone a human so they could say they did. Now, due to cloning being a great potential on the impact of humanity and on the ways I have discussed, how many of you would go on a strike for a whole week to ban human cloning? And how many of you would at least sign a petition so that Congress doesn't pass human reproductive cloning in the US?